Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a great, please have a seat. It's a great honor to be here. I just told Gabrielle that when she's the leading public figure in this country, and I show up, promise she won't say Joe Who is outside. You say Joe Biden, remember, just remember me, okay? All right. Chancellor Davidson, Vice Chancellor Bartholomew, thank you for hosting us today on this beautiful campus of Ulster University. I came here in '91 in this neighborhood, and you couldn't have a glass building like this here in this neighborhood. I don't think it would have stood up very well. But things are changing. Lord Mayor Black and Secretary of State of Northern Ireland, Heaton Harris, thank you for the welcome to Belfast. And Mr. Speaker and leaders of Northern Ireland's leading 5 political parties, I was honored to welcome you to the White House a few weeks ago, and it's wonderful to see all of you again today. And Ambassador Hartley, thank you for your outstanding work leading our mission to the UK. Ambassador Hartley is an old friend and the former ambassador from Great Britain to the United States. The home of that ambassador and the embassy is along the fence line of the Vice President's residence, which I lived in for 8 years. And the Vice President and I became friends with the ambassador. And his last trip back home before he came back to Washington to serve out the final few months of his term, he told me he was going to bring something back for me. And so I didn't know what he had in mind. But when he came back, we had him over the house. We spent some time together, he and his wife and I and my wife. And he brought back a book with a photograph on the front of the book. It had been just reprinted, the book, of a somewhat stout British captain in his quarters with a big bulldog sitting next to him. And his name was Captain George Biden, because he used to always kid me and saying, you know, Biden's English. You talk about the Irish, Biden's English. And he told me that he went back and he had the Lord Admiralty, this is God's true story, check. And my great 1840, I think it was 1842, could have been 1828, I can't remember, it's one of those 2 dates, had written the rules of mutiny for the British Navy. And I said, well, at least that part's consistent, Reverend, mutiny. But anyway, he used to always kid me when I'd say, talk about, he'd say, yeah, you talk about the Irish. He said, you're English, just remember that. Then I found out, my sister and I found out the name Robinette, my middle name's Robinette. I thought that all those years it was French. They must have been Huguenots because they came to Great Britain in the 1700s somewhere along the way, and they're all from Nottingham. So I don't know what the hell's going on here. You come back, it's confusing. And anyway, Consul General Rain and Envoy, Special Envoy Joe Kennedy, thank you for your efforts to continue deepening and strengthening the ties between Northern Ireland and the United States. It's good to see Belfast, a city that's alive with commerce, art, and I would argue inspiration. The dividends of peace are all around us, and this very campus is situated in an intersection where conflict and bloodshed once held a terrible sway. The idea, as I said, to have a glass building here when I was here in '91 was highly unlikely. Where barbed wire once sliced up the city, today we find a cathedral of learning, built of glass, and let the shine light out in and out. It just has a profound impact for someone who's come back to see it. You know, it's an incredible testament to the power and the possibilities of peace. 25 years ago this week, the landmark Belfast Good Friday Agreement was signed. And it wasn't easy. I was a United States Senator at the time, and I worked very closely with my good friend George Mitchell, who will be here, I believe, in a couple days. And there were no guarantees that the deal on paper would hold. No guarantees that it would be able to deliver the progress we celebrate today. It took long, hard years of work to get to this place. It took a people willing to come together in good faith and to risk boldly for the future. Leaders for peace like John Hume and David Trimble and David Irvine and Monica McWilliams and Mary Robinson, etc. They were all people that I got to meet back then. And it took people all across Northern Ireland who made the choice to work for a brighter and a shared future. At the time, it seemed so distant, some of it. It seemed so distant. First, at the ballot box, an everyday sense, the acts of seeing each other through the lens of a common humanity, which again, when I first came here as a young senator, didn't seem like it was realistic. It took pioneering women across all communities and parties that said enough, enough, and demanded change, as well as a seat at the negotiating table, including through the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. And it took a determined effort of my good friend, someone who embodies the country's commitment to all the people in this region, Senator George Mitchell. And, you know, his time serving as special envoy for Northern Ireland is one of the great examples in history of the right person for the right job at the right time, in my view. I think sometimes, especially when the distance of history, we forget how hard-earned, how astounding that peace was at the moment. It shifted the political gravity in our world. And literally, it shifted the political gravity. In 1998, it was the longest-running conflict in Europe since the end of World War II. Thousands of families had been affected by the Troubles. Losses are real. The pain was personal. I need not tell many people in this audience. Every person killed in the Troubles left an empty chair at that dining room table and a hole in the heart that was never filled for the ones they lost. Peace was not inevitable. We can't ever forget that. There was nothing inevitable about it. As George Mitchell often said, the negotiations had, quote, 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. But they kept going because George and all the many others never stopped believing that success was possible. And I want all of you to know, especially the young people in the audience today, and don't jump, okay? Oh, I didn't see it all the way up there. As my father would say, please excuse my back, I apologize. But all kidding aside, the American people are with you. Every step of the way, it's real. Those of you who've been to America know that there is a large population that is invested in what happens here, that cares a great deal about what happens here. Supporting the people of Northern Ireland, protecting the peace, preserving the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is a priority for Democrats and Republicans alike in the United States, and that is unusual today because we've been very divided on our parties. This is something that brings Washington together. It brings America together. I spoke about this with Northern Ireland's political leaders as well as the Taoiseach on our St. Patrick's Day celebration at the White House. It's been the key focus for me throughout my career. I remember working as a senator to see how the United States could support and encourage, bit by bit, any moves toward peace. I got elected in 1972 as a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate. And it was just the start of it. I mean, it seemed like it was a goal that was so far away. I remember coming here, as I said, in '91, seeing this city divided and barricaded. Then in '94, when the ceasefire was declared, it was like a sea change. The tide of violence began to recede, hope rolling in. In 1998, overwhelming joy. It's hard to communicate just how deeply invested in your success, the people across the United States are. And those of you who've been there know it. You know it. I'm not making this up. This is real. It's almost people can taste it. The family ties, the pride, and those Ulster-Scots immigrants, those Ulster-Scots immigrants who helped found and build my country. They run very deep, very deep. Men born in Ulster were among those who signed the Declaration of Independence of the United States, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for freedom's cause. The man who printed the revolutionary document was John Dunlap. He hailed from County Tyrone, and countless others established new lives of opportunity across the Atlantic, planting farms, founding communities, starting businesses, never forgetting their connection to this island. As a matter of fact, as you walk into my office in the Oval Office in the United States Capitol, guess what? You know who founded and designed and built the White House? An Irishman. No, not a joke. Not a joke. Passing it down generation after generation. Your history is our history. But even more important, your future is America's future. Today's Belfast is the beating heart of Northern Ireland and is poised to drive unprecedented economic opportunity and investment from communities across the UK, across Ireland, and across the United States. The simple truth is that peace and economic opportunity go together. Peace and economic opportunity go together. In the 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, Northern Ireland's gross domestic product has literally doubled. And I predict to you, if things continue to move in the right direction, it'll more than triple. There are scores of major American corporations wanting to come here, wanting to invest. Many have already made homes in Northern Ireland, employing over 30,000 people. And in just the past decade, American business has generated almost $2 billion in investment in the region. $2 billion. Today, Northern Ireland is a churn of creativity, art, poetry, theater. Some of our favorite television shows, the movies are filmed here, as you know. And I understand the star of the recent Oscar-winning film and someone of Belfast barista, James Martin, is here today. James, where are you? I got to meet James, and I got my picture taken. We're going to home and brag to my daughter. Cruise ships packed with tourists fill Belfast port. And young people, instead of fleeing for opportunities elsewhere, can see their futures and careers for themselves that speak to unlimited possibilities here. How many of you have heard over the years, those of you closer to my age, Mom, Dad, there's nothing here for me. I'm going to move. I'm going to leave. I got to go. Well, it's not happening now. So it's up to us to keep this going, to keep building on the work that has been done every day for the last 25 years, to sustain the peace, unleash this incredible economic opportunity, which is just beginning. I promise you. You think I'm joking. It's just beginning. We get this, keep it going. We all know there's more we can do together. You know, there's so much energy and dynamism, especially among young people who are starting their own businesses, blazing their own trails, connecting to the global community of entrepreneurs. And young people in Northern Ireland are on the cutting edge of sectors that are going to define so much of the future. Cyber, technology, clean energy, life sciences. Here in Northern Ireland, programs like Young Enterprise Northern Ireland, helping thousands of young people each year gain skills and pursue their goals as entrepreneurs. That's why I asked Joe Kennedy, my new special envoy in Northern Ireland of Economic Affairs, to help supercharge that work, to bring more businesses, more investment, more opportunity here to Northern Ireland, and help realize the enormous economic potential of this region. Because I know parenthetically, when that happens here, it gives faith to people around the world. If it can be done here, it can be done in my community. Not a joke. The world is changing. It's changing drastically. And it presents enormous opportunity, but also significant dangers. To that end, later this year, Joe's going to be leading a trade delegation of American companies to Northern Ireland. Now, I know the UK's departure from the European Union created complex challenges here in Northern Ireland. And I encourage the leaders of the UK and the EU to address the issues in a way that served Northern Ireland's best interest. I deeply appreciate the personal leadership of Prime Minister Sunak and European Commissioner von der Leyen to reach an agreement. The Windsor Framework addresses the practical realities of Brexit and it's an essential step to ensuring hard-earned peace and progress of the Good Friday agreements that they're preserved and strengthened. You know, the negotiators listened to business leaders across the UK and Ireland who shared what they needed to succeed. And I believe the stability and predictability offered by this framework will encourage greater investment in Northern Ireland, significant investment in Northern Ireland. I come from a little state where, the state of Delaware and back home, has more corporations that are registered in that state than every other state in the union combined. So I know a little bit about corporate attitudes. All the immense progress we see around us was built through conversation and compromise, discussion and debate, voting and inclusion. It's an incredible attestation to the power of democracy to deliver needs for all the people. And now I know better than most how hard democracy can be at times. We in the United States have firsthand experience how fragile even long-standing democratic institutions can be. You saw what happened on January the 6th in my country. We learn anew with every generation that democracy needs champions. When I went to college, I was a political science major and history major. We used to, every generation has to fight to preserve democracies. I didn't believe it at the time. I just thought it was automatic. We had this great democracy. What would we need to do? As a friend, I hope it's not too presumptuous for me to say that I believe democratic institutions established through the Good Friday Agreement remain critical to the future of Northern Ireland. It's a decision for you to make, not for me to make. But it seems to me they're related. An effective, devolved government that reflects the people of Northern Ireland and is accountable to them. A government that works to find ways through hard problems together is going to draw even greater opportunity in this region. So I hope the Assembly and the Executive will soon be restored. That's a judgment for you to make, not me, but I hope it happens. Along with the institutions that facilitate North-South and East-West relations, all of which are vital pieces of the Good Friday Agreement. For in politics, no matter what divides us, if we look hard enough, there are always areas that's going to bring us together if we look hard enough. Standing for peace, rejecting political violence must be one of those things. So I want to once more recognize the way the leaders of Northern Ireland's major political parties come together in the wake of attempted murder of Detective Chief Inspector Caldwell to show that the enemies of peace will not prevail. Northern Ireland will not go back, pray God. The attack was a hard reminder that there will always be those who seek to destroy rather than rebuild. But the lesson of the Good Friday Agreement is this: in times when things seem fragile or easily broken, that is when hope and hard work are needed the most. That's when we must make our theme repair, repair. And in Holy Easter season, this season, when all Christians celebrate renewal and life, the Good Friday Agreement showed us that there is hope for repair, even in the most awful breakages. You know, it helped people all around the world to hope for renewal and progress in their own lives. And most of all, allowed an entire generation of young people in Northern Ireland and across the UK and the Republic of Ireland to grow up in a society mended by connection, made stronger by independence, interdependence, and respect. Young people like Gabrielle, who we just heard from earlier. Her success and her opportunities have been underwritten by the Good Friday Agreement. Young people like Jordan Graham, born less than 3 weeks after the agreement was signed in 1998. His whole life his whole life is unfolded under the wing of peace, which means not quite 25 years of age, he's been able to build an expertise in branding and marketing that he's used to help grow local businesses, support startups, consult for charities. Young people like Amy Clint, born in 2000, whose parents like to tell the story about how she came home from her first day of secondary school and asked, what's the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic? What's the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic? She didn't grow up thinking in sectarian divides. She grew up thinking about how she should support her beloved brother and other children with autism. Today, Amy's social enterprise has donated more than 5,000 copies of her book to schools across Northern Ireland to help children better understand autism and to learn to treat others with kindness and respect. That's the real power of the Good Friday Agreement. Compassion. Compassion. It changed how this entire region sees itself. In the words of Morrissey, Belfast's first poet laureate, what's left is dark and quiet, but bookended by light, as when Dorothy opens the dull cabin door and what happens outside is Technicolor. What happens outside is Technicolor. This place is transformed by peace, made Technicolor by peace, made whole by peace. So today, I come to Belfast to pledge to all the people of Northern Ireland, the United States of America will continue to be your partner in building the future the young people of our world deserve. It matters to us, to Americans, and to me personally. It genuinely matters if you've traveled my country. So let's celebrate 25 extraordinary years by recommitting to renewal, repair, by making this exceptional peace the birthright of every child in Northern Ireland for all the days to come. That's what we should be doing. God willing, you'll be able to do it. Thank you all for listening, and may God bring you the peace we need. Thank you.
Well, we have been listening there to President Joe Biden marking the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, giving his address there to those assembled at Ulster University, politicians, students, local dignitaries, reiterating the US's commitment to peace, and in a speech that touched on the need to preserve the peace that has been hard fought over the past 25 years, looking ahead to the next 25 years and a period of prosperity and hope, renewal and growth for Northern Ireland. And also, during his remarks, touching on the delicate political situation here in Northern Ireland at the moment, with the Assembly not functioning, President Biden saying, I hope it's not too presumptuous of me, but I believe that this region needs a functioning government, and that is on you to decide. All right, let's bring in our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn, and Dr. Claire Rice, an expert in Northern Irish affairs, for their reaction to what we've just heard from President Biden. And Dr. Rice, first to you. He was brought on stage, welcomed to the stage by a peace baby, an entrepreneur who was born in 1998, and made real play in his speech of making sure that he spoke to the next generation and the hopes for the next generation.
Yes, absolutely. It was very much a speech focused on the future, looking towards young people, very much dangling the line that, you know, there's the opportunities there if you choose to really harness them and take advantage of them, and a kind of a covert way of saying to the politicians in the room, get back into power sharing, because it's your young people that you are letting down by not doing this. And not just in terms of what is happening within Northern Ireland, but in terms of the support and the opportunities that he seemed to be offering in terms of investment and encouraging young people from in Northern Ireland from the US government. So there's having mic difficulties. So yeah, it was a very empowering speech in that sense from the perspective of younger people in Northern Ireland. But I think interesting as well was he kind of touched on some of the issues around Brexit, some of the perspectives around bringing in the deal that was reached between Prime Minister Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen in terms of the Windsor framework, and again saying that there's an opportunity there, and that of course is one of the key difficulties at the moment with regard to the DUP and their return to power sharing. So in many ways, he said that he hopes that the politicians will listen to his words and his encouragement. Ultimately, the decision lies with them, but you could see right through the speech it was a way of trying to encourage and motivate the politicians to get back around the table.
Dominic, I mean, he was very careful not to go too far in his words. Did he achieve, do you think, that sort of fine line that he had to tread?
Well, I think that people watching will form their own judgments. It was interesting at the beginning, wasn't it? Because he did go, I think, possibly off script almost from the beginning, and with some musings on his own heritage, which I don't think were in the
Making
the
a real
script.
point about him being English.
Yeah, he was saying, because he is, for those who aren't fully aware of this, he is seen as someone who goes on about his Irish heritage a lot. Someone who is seen by people here, many people here, as too pro-nationalist, too pro-Dublin, and someone who harps on about his Irish heritage. But he said how he had been told he's actually British as well. Some encounter in the past, some friend or associate had pointed out that there was a famous British sailor called Sir George Biden.
George
was
Biden,
it?
yes, and a picture of him with a bulldog.
Yeah, somebody exactly sounds like an archetypically British image that he was presented with, and also he said that he has some heritage going back to Nottingham as well. So I think he was keen at the beginning there to say that to play down that Irish heritage, at least certainly at the beginning of his speech. But then when he went onto a script, it was a passionate, heartfelt celebration of the Good Friday Agreement, of the 25 years of peace. And he reminded us that peace was not inevitable, that it took, as the American envoy, George Mitchell, Senator George Mitchell put it at the time, it took 700 days of failure and just one day of success to bring about the peace agreements. And he really emphasised, I think, that America's role in the agreement, but also use that to renew America's commitment to Northern Ireland now. Said American people are with you every step of the way. It's real. And said that actually this is an issue that combines both Democrats and Republicans, those on both sides of the political aisle in America, at a time that is very polarised. Support for peace here and for the Good Friday Agreement is something that combines and unites Americans in common endeavour. And then he talked about the economic benefits that the Good Friday Agreement has brought Northern Ireland, saying it's double GDP here, and saying this is just the beginning. And that, I think, was the heart of his speech, really, was that the economic promise that the Good Friday Agreement and peace has brought to Northern Ireland, is saying that's just the start, and that there's a lot more that could come if only the politicians here can settle their differences and get back into power sharing. And as you were saying, it was a sort of subtle, it was not over-assertive, I think, exhortation to politicians to get back into power sharing, but saying, if you're honest and loyal to the interests of your own people, you've got to get back together, bury the hatchets, and get back to power sharing.
Yeah, and as we're talking, Dominic, you can see Joe Biden just working the room following that speech, speaking to those there that have been in the room, listening to him, having a quick interaction with the actor James Martin, who stood up and took some applause when mentioned by President Biden, of course a recent Oscar winner, and also speaking to Gabrielle Feenan, the entrepreneur who did welcome President Biden to the stage. It'll be interesting to see if while in the room he goes around and speaks to any of the political leaders there that have been listening to him. And on the political elements of it, Dominic, he did talk about and use very careful language where he talked about the impact that Brexit's had on this region, saying that he accepts that Brexit caused a few problems.
Yeah, and he's somebody who's been critical of the impact Brexit has had on the Good Friday Agreement and has been concerned about that publicly. And he said that he believes the Windsor Agreement is the best way forward and encouraged politicians to get behind that. And said that significant investment should follow, but the main lessons that America has to bring to this is the importance of institutions, and saying that all institutions, all democratic institutions, are challenged at times, and talked about January the 6th and what challenge that has brought American democracy, the assault on the Capitol there, but also said that conversation and compromise was essential. So encouraging politicians to follow American leads and others here to compromise for the greater good, I think, and to bury their differences and to get behind the power-sharing agreement that is at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement. It doesn't work without that. It's come and gone. It's been suspended and been renewed a number of times. But he's saying it's important now that politicians of all parties here get back together and get back to power sharing, because the economic promise of this part of the world is so great that it's going to be worth it for everybody to do so.
Yes, you can see the president there taking a few selfies with some of the students who've come to listen to him speak. And as he was speaking, Dr. Rice, we saw a few shots of the room, a few of the backs of people's heads they were listening on. And we got a shot there of Jeffrey Donson, leader of the DUP, and Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin, of course, First Minister and Deputy First Minister, they're sitting together, not in power sharing at the moment, but sort of the choreography, the symbolism of them sitting together, listening to President Biden as he tries to encourage them back will be important.
Absolutely, and we referenced as well the attempted murder on a senior police officer here in Northern Ireland just a number of weeks ago, and really emphasised, the political leaders in Northern Ireland were able to come together and denounce that attack. So there is commonality there. All of them fundamentally share the same ambition of trying to make Northern Ireland work, albeit for different motivations and in different ways. That's politics, but that sense of them being able to work together as kind of underpinned his point there that they should work together, notwithstanding the difficulties that come with all democratic institutions, as we've discussed here already. So all of those elements come together. It's not just the practical things that he's talking about, it's the optics as well of actually seeing those leaders back together. Because, of course, we don't have the functioning institutions now. We don't see that regularly. It's only in extreme situations that we have seen that. So this is another opportunity to really project that image that the two leaders can work together if they choose to.
And Dr. Rice is someone who's from here. So the reason I wanted to come to you first to get your instant reaction to the fact that, because he's talking about you when he talks about those peace babies. He's talking about your generation and those of you that live in this city who are going to take this country forward. I mean, we talked a little bit about it before he started talking, how it's going to be received. I mean, what do you think now, having heard what he said, how it will be received by ordinary voters? We've got elections coming pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely, and there was that concern that he might lean very heavily on his Irish identity coming here, but the fact that he decided to start his speech by saying, actually, yes, I'm an Irishman, I have those heritage, a lot of heritage and those links, but I also have links to an English identity as well as part of my heritage. So that's very much saying, look, yes, I might fly the Irish flag, in terms of how I speak about things, but just like people from Northern Ireland, there's a multiplicity to my identity, and all of these kind of tie in with the dynamics that we see on the ground here in Northern Ireland as well. So I thought that was a positive start that we weren't necessarily expecting him to do, and I think that'll be positively received, because there was a sense of concern that he was going to very much, I suppose, use the same sort of language and rhetoric that he'll be using south of the border in the next few days.
As we continue to look at these pictures of President Biden in the auditorium there at Ulster University, you can see speaking there to the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, just exchanging a few brief words there. And Dominic, they will have had a conversation earlier today, weren't they, when President Biden was meeting with Rishi Sunak. It's worth paying close attention to who he's speaking to now, because it would seem as if he's getting some of the political leaders as well. But they will have had a conversation, of course, and I guess the Chris Heaton-Harris will have given President Biden a few points on to how to address those points about Brexit, about power sharing, and how to say sensitively, let's get this thing started again.
Well, I think, that would have been fed through the speech-making process that would have been underway at the American Embassy and at the White House for weeks ahead of this event. Of course, the President has also met the Prime Minister for what appears to be a slightly sort of pared-down meeting. We thought it was going to be a full-scale bilateral diplomatic encounter, and then a US official said that, no, it would be more of a bi-latte, saying it would be a sort of more of a coffee meeting, which is, I think, had people scratching their heads as to what the diplomatic significance of that is. And all we've had out of that meeting so far, I think, is that that the President was asked what will you be doing in this meeting, what will you be discussing? He says, I'm here to listen. He also talked about what a great view they had there. So I think we've yet to have a full readout of their meeting. I think also questions about why the Prime Minister wasn't here himself. And I think that's adding to the sort of speculation as to what exactly has been going on here. Did the White House want to have more of an elaborate, more extensive visit to Northern Ireland, and was that sort of reduced by Downing Street? What exactly happened? Because there does seem to have been a change of plan, at least in terms of how extensive the visit was going to be.
Yeah, and just as you were talking, Dominic, there, you saw President Biden put an arm around the Deputy First Minister designate Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin there and take a picture. Of course, see how that picture turns out. The symbolism of that is, though, important because he's had a quick chat with her off the back of this speech. We were waiting to see when he gets to speak to any of the other leaders within the room.
Yes.
Sorry, yes. No, it is very interesting, and just looking at the joviality there, whenever the First Minister designate and President Biden were talking to each other there, it does show that there is somewhat of a relationship there. It'd be interesting to see just what the reaction is with the other party leaders, presumably as he moves around the room here. But yeah, thinking about the optics of this in itself, it's quite notable that Michelle O'Neill is standing there on her own, albeit with colleagues from her own party around her. It doesn't seem to be the normal type of procession that you might expect to see in these sorts of scenarios where it's very much choreographed. You have everyone lined up in terms of their seniority, and it's all very formally done. This seems to be very much just a very informal walk around, and whoever comes across first is the first person to get there. So that in itself might have an interesting dynamic thereafter, as people deconstruct what they're viewing here and think about, why is it or how is it that certain individuals were able to get to the President quicker than others. So that'll be interesting to watch just who comes forward next and how that all works out.
Yeah, I think you also had a quick chat with Alex Muskie, who would have been, I think, Speaker as well, and Colin Eastwood from the SDLP. And I suppose it is who comes forward to speak to him, but I guess also who hangs on to speak to him is important too.
Absolutely, yeah, and the amount of time that they spend with each other as well. If it's seen that President Biden, for example, is spending more time with a leader from one party than another, it's Northern Ireland, these things will be picked apart, so that in itself could be something that is poured over in the days ahead.
Yes, it's more of a huddle, isn't it? It's more of a free-for-all, and as you say, who can get to the President and get a word with him. And we were told, we've been asking ahead of this, and they were asking on the plane on Air Force One as Joe Biden was coming here, is he going to meet all the leaders, all 5 leaders of the parties? Will they be separate meetings? Will it be more informal? I'm not entirely clear, I don't think we are yet, as to what will follow this, but it does seem at this stage to be more of an informal huddle, people sort of pressing forward to meet him. We've not seen Sir Geoffrey Donaldson yet, have we?
We haven't yet.
DUP leader. Trying to make his way towards the President or not. He, of course, was late, and while all the other leaders were here, he turned up late, and I think questions were raised actually some concern as to whether he was even going to turn up. He did turn up, but he's not so far taken the opportunity to make his way to the President and have a word with him, possibly waiting for a more formal moment later in the day.
Yeah, and this is exactly the point, isn't it, Dominic, that we were talking about, the idea that President Biden, very careful in his words, stuck to the script in the main during his speech, did veer off with some interesting anecdotes about his Britishness, his Englishness, but this is the moment now when speaking to those political leaders, the decision makers, where those relationships can be formed, strengthened, or perhaps if you don't speak to the other side, there can be a little damage perhaps caused.
Well, I guess as the DUP leader has not made himself available yet to the President, any sort of jeopardy that might be an encounter between the two is so far avoided. But I guess he might be waiting for a moment later in the day when he could meet him. And it does look like there's some kind of sort of process of people lining up to try and have a word with the President. It's certainly fairly unusual. It's more like the end of the State of the Union address in America, where the President gives his address, his annual address, and then sort of joins a melee, a mingling with Congress people and American politicians. It feels more like that. It feels informal. We'll have to see later whether there's something more formal, more one-on-one meetings with the different party leaders.
Yeah, we've got a shot there of former Congressman Joe Kennedy III, the US economic envoy to Northern Ireland, and President Biden making it clear in his speech as well there, Dr. Rice, that Mr. Kennedy is going to be coming back to Northern Ireland, leading a trade delegation in the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the really significant aspect here is it almost feels like a sideshow to Joe Kennedy visiting Northern Ireland. It seems to an extent that President Biden's role is to almost promote the fact that he's here to really generate the thinking and the dialogue around the opportunities that this relationship could bring, and really to set the stage for him to be able to take his plans forward in terms of developing those investment opportunities. So quite ironically, we'll have a bit of a flip. Normally it's the diplomats that come with the President that are the sideshow, but I think it's possibly the other way around, particularly with this Northern Ireland aspect of President Biden's visit.
Dominic, just a thought on the speech and some of the rhetoric that was used. He quoted a couple of poets, didn't he? I think was it Morrissey that he quoted as well, talking about the darkness and the outside being in technicolor. There's this idea of hope, renewal, reclaiming the peace. I mean, he certainly went there in his language in attempts to kind of raise the sort of feeling that, you know, this is all for you now. This future is yours, and you can seize it and make the most of it when you can.
Yeah, the theme was about youth. A lot of the theme was that once he'd moved on from the history of the Good Friday Agreement, and how much support America had given the agreement, an agreement that America really regards as one of its great foreign policy achievements, diplomatic achievements of recent times. Once he'd moved on from that, and he kind of, I think, invoked the spirit of 25 years ago to then renew America's commitments to the agreement, but also to the peace and stability of Northern Ireland, but also to the people, and particularly the youth of Northern Ireland. And he said there's so much energy and dynamism here, so much entrepreneurial spirit, and there's so much more that can be unleashed here from that spirit if the right political environment is created, and if the full promise of the Good Friday Agreement is fully realised. And then he said, as you say, he then used the poetry of the poet he was quoting to say this place is transformed by peace. It's made technicolor by peace, and pledged American support to support that.
OK, well, Dominic, just before President Biden got up to speech, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had something to say about his meeting with President Biden and ahead of the President's remarks. Let's listen to that.
You know, it was great to welcome President Biden to the UK for, I think, the fourth time since he's become president, but particularly to a part of the UK that is very special and dear to him. It also reminds us of the contribution that America made to the peace process as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And President Biden and I spoke a lot about that, and we spoke in particular about the incredible economic opportunities that are there in store for Northern Ireland. And we talked about the investment potential that is there, the companies that want to invest in Northern Ireland. I think that's incredibly exciting. It will bring growth, jobs and prosperity to Northern Ireland. And I know he shares my ambition to see the institutions here back up and running. That's what people and businesses in Northern Ireland deserve.
Now, you're the British Prime Minister. Why aren't we seeing more of you and him standing together, speaking together? You're not even going to his speech. Has this trip really been worth it for you?
Well, it's the fourth time that President Biden has visited the UK since he's become president, and you know, he and I had a very good discussion today about a range of issues, economic investment in Northern Ireland, but also a range of foreign policy issues, the importance of economic security, and that comes on the back of a meeting I had with him last month in the US. I'm seeing him again next month at the G7, and then I'm going to Washington in June. That we're very close partners and allies. We cooperate and talk on a range of things, whether that's supporting Ukraine or, as I said, economic security. I think actually the relationship is in great shape, and the President and I have lots that we're working on together.
Now, junior doctors are on strike for many days. There are reports that Minister